Well, good morning, everybody. I'm going to go a little bit through my graduate history and what I do now, and give you sort of a sense of some of the ways in which I ended up where I am now. However, major caveat, I want to point out that I got to be in the current position I'm in because I slogged through many years as an adjunct. Not recommending that. So, big asterisks in my discussion today. I came into the grad program at SU in 2006. So by the time I had just about finished coursework, the 2008 recession happened. I came in thinking that if I worked hard, kept doing what I was doing, I would be able to have, some sort of a job within academia. That it would take a lot of work, but I could get there. By the time coursework was finished, I was saying, oh shit. And by the time I was moving through the dissertation stage, it was very clear that things had changed dramatically. On top of all of this, while I was in grad school, I ended up getting married to a lovely man, which was fantastic. However, he has a daughter, and we had no plans of moving outside of the Syracuse area. We've got a very firm radius. We're not going to split apart the family so that he couldn't see her. So I came to this realization, A, there are no jobs, this is horrifying, and B, even if there were jobs, I can't go to them. So I have to say, in some ways, this was a little bit relieving. The job market is horrifying, and taking a position where I had the agency to say no to it, rather than the job market over and over and over again in many soul-crushing ways saying no to me, was kind of nice. I made the decision that I was going to stay here and figure it out. Now, I want to underscore that I was able to stay here and figure it out working low-paying adjunct jobs because I was in the privileged position of having a husband who was able to support me. There was a point in the sort of, as we were both getting jobs, me as an adjunct, he as a therapist, before we got married, when he had finally gotten a full-time position and had health care, and I said, okay, can we get married now? And he said, yeah, of course. We had sort of talked about it before, but it was very much, I proposed, and within a week I had found someone from my apartment who was ordained, got a marriage license, we were married, and I had health care. That is crazy, right? The system that we were in, whereby I would be getting married so that I have health care, so that, I might not be making a huge wage, but at least if something happens, I'm not going into catastrophic debt, is insane. Now, I don't blame this on Lemoyne. It's a systemic issue with higher ed in general, so I don't want this to come across as like, oh, Lemoyne, they're terrible in the presses. In fact, Lemoyne, in terms of taking care of their adjuncts, has really been pretty outstanding. But I just want there to be a huge asterisk. Adjuncting is not the way to go. Higher ed should not be going that way. We shouldn't be asking people to get married to survive, period. So I began, it took, shall we say, a long time to finish my dissertation. And as I was taking my long time, I started also adjuncting at Lemoyne College. So I'd adjuncted at Lemoyne for 4 or 5 years. And in that time, finally did defend my dissertation, hooray, hurrah. And at that point, folks there started to look for a position for me that was better. Now, again, this is one of the sort of lucky pieces of my experience. This doesn't happen for most adjuncts. I sort of think of myself as a magical unicorn for whom this did happen. It doesn't usually. Most people, when you go to adjunct at an institution, you do what you're there to do, and then you're forgotten. But in my situation, and it's not just that Lemoyne is lovely, it's also things that I was doing. Before I started to work at Lemoyne, I already knew a lot of people there. One of the things that I would really recommend for folks here as they're moving, especially towards the later stages of their graduate work, is to be networking, not just at SU, but in the community. Right, so through a number of discussion groups and stuff like that, I already knew a ton of folks at Lemoyne before I started working there. So I came into a welcoming community that was saying, how can we help? What can I do to make this experience better? And looking out for positions for me as soon as I got there. So within a year of having my PhD, I was offered a job as director for a Center for Catholic Studies, as well as being a professor of practice. So I feel sort of not quite like I fit on this panel because I actually primarily teach. I teach a 3-4 load, so I teach essentially full-time. I have a course reduction so that it's a 3-4 rather than a 4-4 load. But a lot of my time is spent teaching with a sort of extra cherry on the top of doing some administrative work. Through the Sandstone Center, I organize events, I put together discussion groups, I network with folks in the diocese and stuff like that to sort of facilitate discussion around Catholic studies and theology of the mind. Now, none of this is what I thought I would be doing, except for the teaching part. But even the teaching part is not the direction that I thought I would be going. I primarily teach theology classes now. When I started at Le Moyne, oddly, in a department that has several priests in it, there weren't enough people to teach theology courses. We have both religion courses and theology courses, and people were super excited about teaching the religion courses, and not many people wanted to teach theology courses. I'm a medievalist. I work on medieval monks who do magic, like super practical, I know. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, I can do theology. This is not beyond my field of expertise. And I think that's something that we're taught to be able to recognize quite easily in our graduate work, right? We're told, say yes to doing the survey class, say yes to doing the Buddhism class even though you do Hinduism, say yes, right? But we're not always told to say yes to all the other stuff that we are actually trained to be able to do but don't always recognize that we can do, right? So I came in and was like, yeah, I can do theology. And then folks started asking me to organize things, to put on events. And I could have said, well, no, I don't know how to do that. I don't have any background. I don't have any training. But essentially, because I was kind of desperate and I wanted a full-time job, I said yes. And so I ended up with this job where I'm organizing events and doing all of this stuff that I came to realize I'm actually completely trained to do. Right, since I was a late-stage graduate student, I have almost single-handedly organized an international conference on esotericism. I was in the GSO, I organized stuff within my department. I've been doing this stuff all along, but it always seemed like a sort of something I do under someone else with the help of a faculty, with an existing support structure. It felt qualitatively different than what I was being asked to do for my job, but I said yes anyway. So another thing I would suggest is to think about, how your skills in what you've learned to do in academia translate really well into all sorts of other skill sets that often go by different names, right? I think part of the issue that we have when we're thinking about alt-ec career tracks is that we just have different terminology for a lot of the stuff that we do, right? Organizing a conference doesn't necessarily sound like project management or event management, but it's the same thing. And so just doing some serious thinking about what those skill sets are that you have already can be a helpful way to really position yourself and move forward in careers that might be somewhat unexpected. Let's see, I had everything on my, I think I'll call it there. I'm happy to take questions, but we've got plenty of other fantastic folks here, so pass it on.
Me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm gonna also start a timer. Wow, that looks numbers. So I had a kind of non-linear path, like some people already. I got my bachelor's and a master's degree. My master's degree was interdisciplinary. I did English and film studies, and then had this sort of like hybrid thesis project that really no one really cared what it looked like. So. Well, both departments were like, well, someone else over there looked at this, right? And the other was like, well, someone else over there looked at this. But at that program, not in the film program, but English, which had been my bachelor's, and which, I probably would have kept going in, was just an ugly environment. I really disliked. I always loved school. I'm one of those people where, like, if you could be a professional student, that's my dream job, But when I was in those classes, it was just very competitive and ugly, and people were positioning and angling with and then the faculty were like, I was like, oh, this is soul crushing. I don't want anything to do with this kind of thing. So then I also at the time, all through like my last 2 years of college and my 2 years of that master's program, I was a waitress, and I loved that job. I had all these sort of, philosophical issues and political ideas also about there's no healthcare, like there's very real reasons why I can't just say, I'm gonna be a waitress, And I moved back to New York City, got a job. I worked for 2 years. Well, first I adjuncted, and with an MA, I was like, oh my God, I'm teaching, crazy. I taught so much and didn't get a paycheck. One of the schools I was adjuncting at, gave you 2 paychecks, one at the end, October 31st. So you're teaching from like mid-August to October 31st with no money. I was like, how? Like, I was standing there in front of the classroom and just, and you don't get access to the copier, so I was paying for copies myself that I would distribute to them. Holy cow. And then by the time the paycheck comes, like, you owe your credit card company like way more than that. So anyway, I only did that for a semester. Then I got a job at an advertising company in New York, and just through some like temp placement thing, and ended up doing it. And within 2 years of that, I was like, oh, I can't do this. I decided I needed to try grad school again at a different program. It's like, okay, not everywhere can be like that other program. And in the meantime, I applied to be a teacher in the New York City public school system, because they're always aching for teachers, and they don't care if you have credentials or not. As long as you say you'll get them at some point. So for a year, I taught. I got a certificate to teach high school English, but they put me in a GED teaching program, which actually I loved, and it was better for me because there wasn't so much curriculum development and course planning. Like, it was really just helping. Like, everyone had individual needs of how to prepare for the GED, and that also felt like an important social thing to be doing, which was always kind of valuable too. So, and then I got into grad school and went to Iowa, and was so pleased that environment was completely different. It was so lovely. My best years of my life were in grad school at Iowa, I went not saying I need to be a professor, but just having this sort of ache to learn things, and there were all these things I wanted to know, and I felt very ignorant and not knowing, whatever all my issues were. But like, I went there to read basically and have that sort of time to read. And the part of the issue, I thought it'd be okay, and it seemed like, well, you're supposed to get a teaching job, tenure track job, so okay. And it wasn't, I didn't even feel like I could admit to people that I wasn't like so invested in that as my end goal, because it was very clear that was the success story, that, and that if you said, and there were even some faculty who were like, if you're not here to really fight for one of those jobs, because there are very few, like, what are you doing here, And it was hard to, where in my head I'm like, I'm here because I really needed to read this philosophy, and I don't know what else to do. Like, I was miserable in this job and that job, whatever. And I liked teaching. I loved, and I think, like Rebecca said, could have happily been doing it. And while I was in grad school, I decided to just work on a journal that the program had, that it was like a grad student journal, the Iowa Journal of Cultural Studies. with circulation of about six libraries subscribed to our journal. But like it didn't matter, it was still peer reviewed and it still had all the same stuff that would go into like if you were running, you know, Victorian Latin culture or something, you know, big, well big in my field anyway. But so that, and that was sort of inadvertent. It was just something that I was like, maybe I'll do that. Like a lot of humanities people, you know, you always sort of are like, well, I'd love to be a writer, you know, but let's be real, so I thought like publishing was an interesting sort of thing to learn more about. I only did that for a year, and because the staff was so small, you know, I quickly became just like a staffer to the assistant managing editor or something, you know. Like my title was, you know, it sounded very elevated and important, but, you know, but that ended up helping me way down the line. Like I got my degree, and one thing I want to say quickly about, but the idea of the cohorts that everyone's been bringing up, those were so valuable, and they all were kind of inadvertent. One that was had the biggest impact was my last year. I was lucky enough to I won a dissertation fellowship, so I was excused from teaching, and you know it was very isolating because you're just like, you've been given a fellowship, go write this, and, you know. And there was a check-in meeting for all the people who got this fellowship, and it was within the College of Arts and Sciences. And that's one of those things where I always wondered, like, why are those two things? But it was so illuminating because there were like, I don't know, 20 of us, 30 of us, whatever it was, that had to sit in this room, and we were with, you know, the dean, and had to present our projects and, you know, how the fellowship helped us and this and that. And just even hearing people present what they were doing, how far, like what their projects were, what they were doing with them. You know, I was hearing about all this lab work and, you know, these kinds of reports, but like it was so, I was like, wow, like my world had been so small in terms of what I thought everyone was doing when they were doing their dissertation or their final doctoral project or whatever. And, you know, it was like one afternoon that I just had to go because of the requirement of this fellowship, and it taught me more than, you know, a lot of other things about possibilities. So that I think even having like humanities cohort is important. I think in a lot of ways, like a history dissertation looks a lot like an English dissertation, looks a lot like, you know, some of these, so that that's like, that is broadening things up, but I think even going further and saying like, you know, what's the biology, what's the biology, really, really good. And then in forming writing groups, I had friends that were like, oh, I have this friend that I know from, you know, our knitting group. She's in statistics, you know, and then I would get to hear, because we would just meet and work together, but hear about these other projects, and they're very informal cohorts, but, you know, and she ended up, you know, getting a job in Chicago with a bank or something. Like, it was all very cool, and like, and none of that in those departments was seen as failure, you know, where I felt very much like tenure track was the thing that we had to aim for. And like somebody said about what faculty can do and programs, part of it is like the, you know, those placement numbers that they all post on their websites. It's like, oh, our program has an 85% placement rate, and you're like, what? You know, I don't know, and you know, but they can, if you get an adjunct job, they count that as placement success, and they will list that as like, look what we did for XYZ person, you know, and meanwhile XYZ person is like living in a cardboard box on a, you know, and they don't count the successes of someone who, like, if you get a job at publishing, say, oh, I've got a salaried job with health benefits, like I don't appear on that placement thing, although, you know, now it's getting more like there are these, like you were saying, nonprofits and things are more accepted as, and more recognized. But I think having ways of respecting across the board, like from the time students enter the programs to even beyond, like how to say, we value anything you do with a degree. We understand that there's lots that can be done. And even for faculty to kind of reach out to their former PhDs, and not just the ones in academia who I think are, you're more inclined to stay in touch with because you're doing the same things, but just check in and say, hey, I was just wondering like how that's going. I know, whatever, just to see, and then that can help their mentoring with other people. Because I don't reach out to my director ever. Like I do feel something of a, not a failure, but that like they're not going to want to hear like, oh, I never published that monograph, and anyway, that was just some advice, and I haven't even gotten how I got my job, but after I got my degree, I was a visiting assistant professor for 3 years at various places, and was on the market a lot, interviewed a lot, even got offered some jobs, a few, but which is like, I'm so grateful that I was, but they taught me that there were things that mattered more to me than being able to say like, I'm a professor at a university or college. Whether it was the course load, location, salary, like, just all these things together, you'd be like, do I really want to do that just to be able to say, no. And so I eventually just decided, forget this. My partner was living in Syracuse, and I was like, I'm going to just give up on academia. Like, this is not work, and see what happens. And I worked as a barista for a while because I knew I couldn't stand, like, office situations, like the advertising company. I didn't want to just go through that again. I was like, I'd rather go back to, like, waitressing because I liked that. And then there was a job posted at Syracuse University Press for a part-time, like office assistant, and I applied, even though everything in the job description was like administrative, and I mean, I don't even open my own mail for years, like I'm not good with, paperwork and administration, but it was like, can be, maybe, And I was thinking, well, if I get my foot in the door, that'll be a way to see, and I went, and the interview went great, and and even in asking them, because it was sort of unclear what the job was, and I remember the interview when they were like, do you have questions for us? And I said, yeah, what exactly day to day do you want me to be doing? They really didn't care. Basically, all of my communication skills, there was nothing I wasn't prepared to do, I mean, even as much as I would say, oh, I'm not prepared to be like an administrative assistant. Yes, you are, So, and then within 3 months, sort of serendipitously, one of the acquisitions editors was leaving. And, they knew of my background. They loved that I was genuinely engaged in, like, the books they were putting out. A new book would come out. I remember one of the first ones was Early Yiddish Epic. It's like this major, compendium, like, insanely researched. Wonderful. And I was just sitting at the front desk, like I'm the receptionist, and I'm like, this is brilliantly, translated in the citation. And they were like, who is this person at the front desk? So, so they were very happy that I could just step in then and be an acquisitions editor, which isn't normal. I mean, often you would have to be like an editorial assistant and things, at larger publishing companies. But, this being a smaller press, that opportunity was real, and I feel good being an editor. I do feel like that's, something that isn't that's still close enough to what I was doing, that I feel kind of good about. And Teresa Mangum was even on my dissertation committee, and she says, like you're saying you'd like to get invited back. She's like, we're going to invite you out in the spring to talk about how you're one of our graduates that's, doing something all that good stuff. So, it all kind of meanders and goes how it goes. But that's history and advice, and I plan on waiting.
I guess it's my turn to chronicle my meteoric rise. Howard.
It's really hard to hear in back. I just do the project. There's a lot of noise. Just yell.
Okay. So I probably, like many people here, decided I was going to be a professor when I was maybe 20. The professor of Shakespeare scared the daylights out of me, and she was amazing. And so I said, I want to be a professor. I remember telling her, and she was typing on her keyboard, and she didn't even look up. She was like, it'll be very hard for you. And then I left because that was it. And so that was what I was going to be. So I did my bachelor's, I went into a master's program, and then I applied to all the great schools and nobody took me. So I just spent 3 years, I was living in New York, 3 years doing various weird jobs. I worked as a studio manager for a fashion photographer. I worked for a sort of Devil Wears Prada boss of a fabric design company. I was I'm that quiet? Is this better?
Oh, yeah. It would have been better the whole time.
Should I start over? I'm not going to start over. I did all these weird jobs anyway. And basically the whole time while I was doing these weird jobs, I was not thinking at all about my career because I was trying to get back in. And so insofar as I could sort of make do eating dumplings on Canal Street and just kind of live in a weird converted butter factory there, I could just kind of keep it rolling. So I got back in, and I went to Fordham in the Bronx, and I'm still going to be a professor. I did that. I basically decided only after I had taught for a while that that didn't seem as fun as I thought it was going to be. It wasn't anything like the C.S. Lewis or Hogwarts thing, or these students, hanging on my every word, except for letters like A, B, C. And it was mostly about stopping them from doing this in my class. And then I didn't like public speaking, still don't, sorry. I didn't like grading, I didn't like syllabi. After a while, when you've crossed off all the things on a list, maybe you don't want to do that thing. But then I didn't know what to do. And because I had spent all this time eating dumplings and living on Canal Street, I didn't know what else anybody did. I had basically the career brain of a 20-year-old. So I didn't really know where to turn, and like many other people, I didn't want to out myself to professors as maybe not wanting to do this. So at the same time, I was talking to deans of classes, freshmen, dean of sophomores, because I had students who were messing up in class, and so you talk to those people. And over time, I realized I'd spoken to them enough that I should just kind of have lunch with them or coffee with them. So I did, and I said, here's what I liked about what you do and how we interact and all this. What does this mean for me? And of course, because everybody wants to clone, they said, you want to be a dean of freshmen. So that was what I was going to be. I was going to be dean of freshmen. Turns out there actually aren't a lot of deans of freshmen in the world. See? I'm now a dean of freshmen. So I basically talked to them about it. I got this dean title in my head. I was going to be a dean. And so I talked to everybody at Fordham basically who could help me in any way or advise me, which incidentally meant no professors because they couldn't help, right? Even though some of the people in my program are fairly prominent in the alt-act world, like Leonard Cassuto, I just didn't tell anybody about my transgressive interests. But I started, trying to apply for jobs. I spoke to the dean of the grad school there, and she was willing to recommend me, not my advisor. Let's not go overboard. And for the first year of applications, I got crickets. I was writing these applications and basically saying, based on teaching 1.5 million classes of composition, I know I want to be in academic administration, which is as persuasive as it sounds. And it was only after doing this for a while that I realized, this wasn't working. But I'd also been talking to enough people in the administration to know that there was a hiring freeze at Fordham and that everybody was complaining about all the work they had to do. So I went to the dean of freshmen and said, my wife had a tenure track job. So I said, I have health insurance. You can't pay me less than I currently earn. So why don't you hire me in a sort of scut work capacity to do the stuff you don't want me to do? Let's, splice something together. You get help, I get experience. If you like me, you can keep me. If you don't like me, I got help. I got experience and you got help. And, this is obviously maybe the most pragmatic thing this humanist had ever heard. And it was the most pragmatic thing I have ever said to date. And so he said, yeah, you should do a proposal to the dean of the school. So I wrote that proposal and they said yes. So I became their first academic counselor, which is to say helping people who had like 1.5 and below GPAs who are freshmen, which is, believe it or not a small number of people as you would expect. You can't become a sophomore unless it's no longer that GPA, but there's a lot of sort of pushing that you have to do or can do in the meantime to improve the situation. So I did that, I became an academic advisor, and lo and behold, after doing all this, I did get interviews because I had some things to say. And so I applied to jobs, I was getting interviews. I saw a job come out from this university that I thought was like a quaint little university town on the Hudson River called Syracuse University. I was living in Mamaroneck, New York, which is a quaint little town. And so I just assumed this was another one like that, and not snowy. So I saw this job, and my wife pointed out this job, meaning associate director, which is the former role I did in the earlier part of my meteoric rise to power. And I said, I don't know anything about career development. Why would I do that? And my wife said, you are career developing. This is what you're doing. Just do it for other people. So I applied. Actually, when I look back at the application, I'm actually not sure I did apply. I think my wife might have written that. It doesn't sound like me. It sounds really good. But as I got closer to this job, and as other people weren't also offering me jobs, it started to sound increasingly good for both of those reasons. So I took this job, and I've been here ever since. And so I guess really the only advice that I can give to you guys, the only real pearl of wisdom is if my wife tells you to do something, you should do it. All right, pass it on.
Can I meet your wife?
What's that?
Can I meet your wife?
Yeah, she'll tell you what to do.
Hey, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be here, and I'm really impressed and grateful that Syracuse is doing this program. I wish that I had this kind of opportunity when I was in graduate school. And I'm going to start by saying that that I'm trying to think of a politic way to put this, but I can't think of it. Nothing that I did to get where I am was supported by my faculty. So the fact that there are faculty here who are supportive of this, I think, is really fantastic. My faculty thought they were being supportive. I also want to say that. They thought they knew what I wanted and what would be good. So I guess my first piece of advice to faculty would be to trust your students and what they say they want in their lives and what is going to make them happy and fulfilled. So I didn't decide I wanted to be a professor when I was 20. I decided I wanted to be a professor when I was 5. My dad was a professor, and so I thought that's what I want to be. And I went straight from my bachelor's degree through a couple of master's degrees right into a PhD program. And if you think that sounds like a recipe for burnout and disillusionment, you're right, it is. I don't recommend it. But I also thought that I knew what I was getting into to become a faculty member. I knew what it meant to be a faculty member. I knew what it meant to get a faculty position. I did all of my research. I got into a top program. So I did my PhD is in medieval studies from Notre Dame, as was said. And I did research on job placement. It had really, really great job placement stats. I also entered my PhD program in fall of 2008. And nothing mattered after that point. None of the preparation or research that I had done mattered. And like somebody said earlier, nothing that my faculty knew about how to get a job and what a job meant mattered either. And so I kept working toward a faculty position, and
but at the beginning of my PhD, I had this feeling in the back of my head, well, maybe also I would like a library job. That's something that I think would also be enjoyable as a backup. And I mentioned that to one of my professors who was my most supportive professor, and her reaction told me, actually, no, you shouldn't mention that to any of your professors from this point on. But I still took some advantage of some opportunities that I had actually being away from my program to investigate libraries. So I had a fellowship that took me to London for a year, and partly because I was interested in it, partly so that I could talk to other people instead of just sitting in libraries all day. I volunteered to sit in the library all day, but actually not working on my own stuff, but actually working at the library. So I took a volunteer position at the Warburg Institute so that I could work on manuscript digitization. I came back, and after my funding ran out, I was a freeway flying adjunct for a few years. After it burned through my car engine, I stopped doing that. And I also took a library job at my institution because I started thinking more and more like, actually, this isn't what I want. My advisor just told me that I should plan on being a visiting assistant professor for at least 5 years, and I need 8 articles and a book proposal accepted to get a faculty job. Like, that sounds awful, and I don't think it's going to work, and I don't know how to do it, and I don't want to. So I took this library job, and as I became more involved in social justice organizing on campus and off campus, I realized that really the faculty track wasn't for me. I did go on the tenure track job market for 3 years. The first 2 years, I was really trying. The last year was more so that my advisors didn't know that I was applying for different kinds of jobs. So some other things that I think are important for the position that I have now. My degree is interdisciplinary and my research is interdisciplinary. I work on the intersections of art, history, literature, and science, and I work on manuscript studies. And so that interdisciplinarity, as other people have said, while it turned out to be really problematic when I was applying for tenure track jobs, it's been really, really helpful applying for non-faculty positions. I also took the opportunity during my PhD to do project management type things, which didn't strike me as project management at the time. So I got grants to organize year-long workshops where we brought in speakers, where I had to run a budget. I had to convince people to come. I had to collaborate with other people. And those are the kinds of opportunities that I think that you can build into a PhD program without going so far afield that you're basically doing 2 separate things at once. One of the things though that really was, and this goes back to what other people have said, something that was a real light bulb moment for me was when I had no funding. I applied for a part-time job, actually in our graduate school, and I went and interviewed, and I didn't hear back, and I sent them an email, and they wrote back and offered me the job, and they said, "We're really impressed by your skill set." I was like, oh, I have a skill set. I had no idea I had a skill set, and I did not know what that was, but I was really excited about it. And it turns out that I did have a skill set, but like we said before, I didn't have the vocabulary to describe what that skill set was, other than, I knew that I had skills in reading 13th century manuscripts, but I didn't think of that as a skill set. I didn't realize I had a skill set in collaboration. I didn't realize I had a skill set, that I had skills in project management. I didn't realize that I had skills in managing and coming up with digital projects. And so coming up with words to describe what it is that you do is such a huge component of success outside of the tenure track job search. So the last year that I applied for jobs, I realized that, and this is an important thing to know about careers in libraries. I realized from watching library job postings for a couple of years that it was really important to have an MLIS, and that not having one really kind of hampered, it didn't shut down, but it did really constrain the kinds of jobs and the number of jobs that I could apply for in libraries. And so I applied for also some postdocs that could enable me to get into the library profession. So I applied for postdocs and was awarded postdocs through CLIR, CLIR, which is a nonprofit that has an entire postdoc program for humanities and social science PhDs to work within libraries. I also was awarded a postdoc at ACLS Mellon Public Fellows postdoc, which is another really good avenue that I recommend people go. And then this job came up to be the director of a non-circulating medieval studies research library. There are not very many of those jobs, and the other strange thing about this job is that it didn't require an MLIS, it required a PhD in medieval studies or a related field. So in some ways, my particular career path is a really difficult one to replicate because there are 3 medieval studies libraries in North America. But at the same time, it is one that can be replicated because the things that got me my job were the interdisciplinarity of my research and all of the different things that I had done during my graduate career. This project management piece, the soft skills piece, the collaboration, all of those kinds of things, and the digital piece. I think it was said earlier by Tom, or I think it was Tom, that digital skills are really important. Some sort of experience with digital projects is a really, really useful thing to have. So what do I do? What is my job? I'll tell you really quickly and give just a few tips about library careers. So I'm the director, as I said, of a non-circulating medieval studies research library, the Robbins Library at the University of Rochester. Part of that is also the Kohler Collins Center for English Studies, which is just another non-circulating collection that's housed in my library. So the different pieces of my job, there's an outreach piece. So I work with faculty members. I do instruction, mostly for graduate students in medieval studies specific workshops. It's not a faculty, the library at Rochester, the positions are not faculty positions, so many academic libraries, their positions are faculty positions. I don't teach any kind of traditional classes. I do kind of one-offs and I organize workshops. I also do your kind of more fundamental information literacy sessions, but always with the medieval studies angle. Other things that I do are collection development. So I build our collection, both in our research collection, but as part of my job, I'm also the curator of medieval and early modern manuscripts in our rare books and special collections. So I do all of the collection development from that point of view as well, which is enjoyable. I work a lot with dealers. I try to find money. I write grants, all that kind of thing. And I work with researchers, with graduate students, undergraduates, and faculty who are interested in doing all kinds of exciting digital and non-digital work on our rare materials collections. I organize all of our events. I oversee all of our programming. So I bring in speakers. Like I said, I organize workshops. We do community outreach events. We do large-scale, small-scale events. I put on exhibits. We have a number of digital projects, and I'm the project manager essentially for all of those. I do actually a lot of informal mentoring of graduate students who are looking for somebody that they can talk to about non-faculty jobs. I also do a lot of informal work with graduate students on their academic work. So this isn't technically part of my job. This is a bit of scope creep, but I read a lot of graduate student work and give them advice that they're looking for and maybe not finding elsewhere. Other things that I do the outreach part, I do the collection management part, I do the programming part, and I do the rare books and special collections part. So it's supposed to be a 9-to-5 job. I'm working on making it a 9-to-5 job, but that is one part of it that I really enjoy, that I can go home at the end of the day and I can stop working. So general tips about library jobs for people with a PhD. Some things to know are that having a PhD is a benefit and it is a drawback. Having a PhD means, to be blunt, that faculty will listen to you in a way that they won't listen to library staff who don't have a PhD. That said, they will listen to you to a point, because there is that ingrained bias against people who don't have tenure track positions. So not having an MLIS means that some library professionals who do have an MLIS will be biased against you because they'll see your presence in the library without that degree as a devaluing of their degree, which is true, really. So it is in that sense a double-edged sword, but it can also help you really bridge the gap between the library and the students and the faculty members. Just one example is you can come to scholarly communications from a research perspective, so you can communicate to faculty everything that librarians know about the management and the economics of scholarly communications. And you also know how researchers are approaching publication, whether and how they use journals as well. So something that I would recommend and something that I wish that I had done is I wish that I had done a library degree concurrently with my PhD. And here at Syracuse, I don't know if that's an option, but it seems like it should be an option because you have the iSchool here and it's a really great resource. But even if you can't do it concurrently, I would recommend that you go and you talk to your librarians. And your librarians are not just the subject specialists that you might know about, but it's also people who work in metadata, it's people who work in acquisitions, it's people who work in data preservation and curation, it's people who work in assessment, it's people who work in facilities, and these are all really great positions for people with the humanities background because of all of those things that I talked about and that everybody else has talked about. If you know how to do research, if you know how to talk to and ask people about digital services and projects, if you know anything about data or you know who to ask about data, if you know anything about writing or speaking or teaching, these are all positions that are available to you and that you can explore. And another option is not just to have a job as a librarian, but to have a job in a library where you might be leading some sort, maybe some libraries have teaching centers that are centered in the library. Some libraries have digital scholarship labs that are centered in the library. That's what we have at Rochester. We're out of time, so I'm happy to talk later about the digital side of things because I think that that's a really great avenue for people with PhDs. But to end, I would say I try to tell people from my cohort who are now coming to me having been VAPs and adjuncting for years, who are now ready to jump ship. I tell them, don't think about it as a backup plan. Maybe think about it as a parallel track. But think about, as you're doing your PhD, think about how everything that you're doing, everything that, all of the extra opportunities that you pursue, think about how they could be used in different ways, but also make sure that they're meaningful to what you're doing now. Don't just add stuff for the sake of adding stuff, because then you will be burned out, and you won't, if it isn't meaningful to you, then you won't be able to get the skills from it that you need. And I think the last thing that I would say is, if you're going to make the jump, make sure that you're ready to make the jump. I mean, you might and probably will grieve in some ways if you were really attached to the idea of a tenure track job, and it will be difficult depending on your advisor situation to tell your faculty about what you're doing. But I will say, at least from the library point of view, if you make the jump from libraries but you're thinking, well, maybe I'll try a library career and then I'll go back to a faculty career later, that's not going to happen. So be sure that it's something that you really probably, yes, you do want to do. It's not going to work to go the other direction. But I will say I love my job. I don't regret it at all, and it's really fulfilling, really enjoyable.
Thank you, panelists. Okay, so lunch is in the process of making itself happen out in the hall. While that's going on, let's take some questions.
I'll speak loudly. Who served, since most of you are coming into a career that your advisor may or may not have been on board with, or couldn't really serve as a adequate or useful reference, when you apply for your jobs, who served as your references? Who did you put down in that box in that web form?
I'll start because mine's super weird. I've never actually applied for a job at Lemoyne. They've all just been given to me. So when I was an adjunct, there was a student in my department who was moving on. He had gotten a job and he recommended me to my department chair and I got that job. I think I sent in a resume or something, but like that was all. And then when I got my current position, I chatted with the dean and I sent them, I sent them my CV again and all of that. And,
Which dean?
Kate Costello Sullivan. And then I got the job. So that's not helpful.
Interesting though.
Interesting though.
Who is Dean of Arts and Sciences?
Yes, who is university?
I know, I'm.
Yeah. She's an alum.
I did eventually tell my advisor that I was applying, but I also used 2 people that I had networked with or worked with in other capacities. So it was kind of like 2 faculty, 2 admins.
I also finally told my faculty that I was applying, but this is where I think the networking becomes really important. I was able to have library professionals give me references because I had worked in the library while I was doing my PhD. So.
I at first was just applying for visiting assistant professor positions and things like that. So those references were what they wanted to give. But I think my advisor and I think most advisors, like, they want to see you succeed. And even if you're applying for a job that wasn't what they had hoped you would do, or that they feel they've served you well if that's the job you go into, they still want to give you like the strongest and best recommendation that they can. And I can't imagine, it'd be hard to imagine a scenario where they'd be like, that, I'm not recommending you for that, With that said, I think, like, I had an advisor who was very much like, he was there for the content and the theory, but he wasn't very personally interactive. And the other faculty that were in my area, like Teresa, I had good relationships with, and and they were happy to kind of, and Teresa actually brought me in on some of her teaching. Like, people can be referees that aren't your direct advisors. And it might even be better if they could speak to, what you really do and what you really like better. And then also by the time I was applying for really just outside jobs, I had been a visiting assistant professor at a few places where those references have a different, one, they're valuable because they're more recent than, but 2, they're people who haven't seen you, they're not like invested in, well, we've trained this person and we've known them and we want to get rid of them after, 8 years of trying to see her do something. Where they can say, wow, like, she came in and really connected with our students, she was able to adapt to, the curricular needs and blah, blah, like, whatever. Like, I think that it can show, highlight a lot of things about your abilities that might even not be taken as seriously coming from, your dissertation committee.
Just one more piece about this. I just finished up a search, and this is a note about whom you choose for your references. I had one person whose references I called, and there were 2 of her professors on the list, and then there was a person kind of who did my work but at that institution. And I found that, and this is just important to think about who you might cultivate as references, the professors kind of said things like, whatever she applied for, I'm sure she wants to do. And if she puts her mind to it, she will do a great job. And then the other people who had seen her in this particular capacity said very useful and very specific things and gave me something to go on. So it's not like it was a bad reference, but it was pretty useless too. So just a thought on, the people you are cultivating.
With that in mind, it's always really good, and I would always tell my students that when you're asking for a reference, make it as easy as possible for that person to refer you. Tell them this is what the job is, these are the bullet points of what I would like you, what would be nice if you would be able to say about me. Some of them are even like, write a letter and I'll sign it, which, is whatever. But, the more that they could just say, like, if the phone rings and say, oh yes, she's written 5 articles related to blah, 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 and not just like, oh yeah, she's that's good, so that they know this is what the job is, this is the skills the job asks for, and this is what I would want this is what would be most helpful to me if you could say about me. And that's not rude, that's actually hugely helpful, because they don't want to spend time figuring that out for you.
Vivian. Faculty member in the room, but Erin and I were just, well, being bad students, we were talking a little bit in the session, we're passing notes. Erin and I we need to hold a workshop for faculty about, and we've had these before, but maybe something a little different where we would have a workshop for faculty to provide the kinds of vocabularies or, the special translator lens that you like everyone, here's your glasses, put them on, this is you. But I think your point, I think we recognize we need to do more of that. What are the vocabularies and what are the ways to talk about skill sets? And help us name that. Maybe we lack, like I said, the special translator little tool that we need, and there's lots of supportive faculty who want to be able to do that better, and we don't know how. But your point about remembering that we need to ask our students also to say, give me some bullet lists, like so when I get the academic line phone call to talk about you, maybe color coded, the blue one and the green one or something, so that we also have at our fingertips different ways of talking about you from your perspective. Like, how do you see yourself? How do you see your work? It's one thing for us to name it, but I also think we need to remember to ask for your help, and I think we know how to do that on the academic side, like give me your latest CV and blah, 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 but we haven't necessarily asked for that on the other side. So, Glenn, I think we have another workshop we'll put together sometime.
I go beyond that.
Job security for me.
I go beyond that and say that not only do we need workshops, but we also need to develop a toolkit.
Well, I think out of that, I'd like to have some longer term outcomes where we build a toolkit. Yeah.
I have a very foundational question that I always ask people, and I would like to ask you because you are experts in this. How do you understand the abject tolerance for people in PhD programs or recently graduated PhDs for the kind of labor that is offered them? And what do you think their professors and their graduate programs need to do to counter that miserable tolerance? I'll be a PTI for the next 8 years and I'll scrape by someone. It's horrible. And I don't understand why people put up with that, and I want to know what you see as the role of faculty for trying to limit that kind of miserable existence.
We also
I have a lot of thoughts about this, and I will just share a few of them. I actually think that the first one is not talking to your students, but talking to your department and your administration about not hiring students into those kinds of positions. So in some ways it starts with making sure that your institution is not relying upon that kind of labor to run, all right? So that's a really big one that I would say. And that's not specific to any one institution. That's a general thing. I think that something that you can do in talking with your students is actually being open and making sure that they feel comfortable sharing with you what it is that they want out of their lives, and you can be frank about admitting that. I think somebody said earlier, faculty jobs now might not be what faculty jobs were when you were hired, and what it means to be junior faculty now is not what it meant to be junior faculty then. So being honest with them and with yourself about what the realities are for the job market. So my advisor, who only has ever wanted the best for her students and was trying to be really helpful and optimistic, would say she would go through CVs and crunch the numbers, like I said before, like those are not numbers that I was pulling out of thin air. Like she said, you do need this and that will give you your faculty job. So thinking about how being realistic that that's probably not going to happen, and telling students like you really need to be willing to pull the plug, but let's talk about why this is a valuable thing for you to do anyway, And there are all of these options out there for you that maybe I can't name them, but I can point you toward people who can help you figure out what those options are. And we can talk about how what you're doing in your research and your classes will prepare you for this wide range of jobs.
Another aspect of this is faculty are, by definition and sort of self-proclamation researchers. This isn't beyond the ability of a faculty to find out some information about it. You know, I mean, one of the first things I had to do when I started this job is when someone came up to me and said, what kind of thing can I do that's not professor jobs in the humanities? I had to be able to say government, nonprofit, advocacy. Like, I had to have a list of things to rattle off. But I just didn't have the list, like right now, you know, and it's not that hard. And if we know that historically, it's not like this is a new factor, but if we know historically that the majority of students do not go on the tenure track or don't get tenure, that means that we have theoretically a huge backlist of people who are doing something else. And you know them, you work with them, you know, I mean, you can cultivate that. So, you know, that's another piece of it. Third piece would be, don't speak dichotomously about the future. You know, don't either assume something. First, I guess the first thing to say is you have to ask people and permit people to tell you what they want to do. Not by saying, you know, would you like to be on the tenure track, or would you like to do something else? Or, you know, like you have to say, I am willing to accept any answer that you give me, or I'm open to all kinds of things, and I'm wondering what you're considering for your career, recognizing that that might change or take shape over time. Like that's okay to do, and it's something that if you don't do, the sort of power and the kind of institutional structures at play will speak for you. And what they will say is that you want to be a tenure track person, and that's what I'm going to accept from you as a response. So you have to initiate that. It's not something that can happen on the other end.
Yeah, I mean, agree with everything that's been said. And, you know, I remember just anecdotally when I was talking to the director of graduate studies toward the end of my time, and, you know, and she was one of the more positive people about, like, you can do other things, you know. She was like, you know, like, why don't you go work at the UN? You know, and that was her answer to, like, what could I do? You know, and I'm like, oh, do I just, like, knock on the door and say, I'm here? You know? Right. I mean, like, my family, when I got my degree, and they're like, why don't you just work at NYU? It's right there, you know, like, just tell them you'll be their new professor.
Did that work?
So yeah, like just having knowledge and I think there's just such a different bubble of, you know, what their experiences have been and opportunities were, you know, 30 years ago, whatever it was, whoever they are. But that, you know, like if I said to her, I think I might want to apply to be an administrative assistant at a small academic publisher, part-time. you know, they would have, I don't know what they would have done, you know, but it would not have been, you know, they would have been like, why? Well, go to the UN, what are you doing? You know,
45th Street.
where like, right, which is the way that I got a job that they're now very proud to say, we have a graduate who's an acquisitions editor for a university press, who's, you know, reading your proposals and deciding things, whatever. So, you know, their view, it's hard not to take the faculty's view of possibilities like somewhere inside you and use them as judgment also. But you need to resist that. And the people I most admired of my fellow students, you know, were the ones who didn't listen, you know, and actually often not listening. Like there was one, she was very adversarial with like her whole committee, but she did what she loved, you know, and she was studying like just local productions of Shakespeare all over, particularly in lower income communities and all kinds of things. And she ended up getting a tenure track job. She was like one of 2 people. Because schools were interested in like, wow, here's someone doing exciting work that they're excited about. You know, it's not like, oh, let's pick who wrote the most traditional, obscure thing about Shakespeare or somebody said. But my other point that, sort of ties back to my own experience was that I feel like too much now, the idea of graduate school is not, it's almost thought of as like a technical training program, where like, what are you gonna do at the end? Where I had classes like graduates programs often aren't just valuing themselves in and of themselves, like that there's value in just having taken this class, like at the end of class, how great that we've all read this and talked about this material together, because that is great, and that was why I was there. And for them to say like, if you don't want a tenure track job, you shouldn't be here, was sort of insulting to even their own endeavor in, imparting this knowledge. So I think valuing being in school, at least as much as valuing where people go after would help a lot.
So one of the really central things when we're talking about adjunctification is that none of the onus should be on graduate students, none of the onus should be on adjuncts. It's, people in the room who don't yet have their PhDs that the onus is on. I had a really great model at one of my faculty members, Jennifer Glancy. Every meeting, when there was any possibility of the perils of adjunct labor coming up, she would bring it up. I never once had to say anything at all until I had a full-time position, at which point it is now my responsibility to bring it up every single chance I have. That's what we all need to do. And I think one of the reasons that adjunct labor is continuing is because it's easy. It's easy at the administrative level. And one of the things that makes it hard is being forced to have hard conversations about adjunct labor. And that's our job. I just had a meeting with he was like the assistant to the Jesuit provincial. And he thought he was there to talk about, ways that we form faculty into good Ignatian pedagogical models. And he was in fact there to talk about the problems of adjunct labor and how we can do none of that if we don't talk about that first. So it's on us, it's uncomfortable, and I might get fired, but that's okay.
What's for Jesuit labor issues?
Yeah.
And that's also how you talk about graduate labor as well, right? Your student. We have to value all of the work that goes into what you're paid for, as well as what you're there to study.
Well said. Okay. Oh, and let's thank our panel.